Well, hey there, ABC. Hope you all are doing really, really well. Today is Thursday. Today is the day in Jesus's final week of his ministry before his death, leading up to his resurrection, when Jesus met in the upper room with his disciples. Jesus kind of got to explain his heart for his disciples to them, explain his heart for his followers to them. And so today, I just want to look at kind of what that explanation looked like and the gist of it. Jesus is in the upper room. He's having this Passover meal with his disciples. And we call this, in church tradition, this Thursday, it's called Maundy Thursday. And the reason it's called Maundy Thursday is that the word Maundy actually means command. So it means the Thursday that a command was given. And the reason we call it that is because in the upper room with his disciples, Jesus instituted a new commandment. John 13:34 says this: Jesus said to his disciples, "A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another just as I have loved you. You also are to love one another." So this is what happened. Jesus had just washed his disciples' dirty, nasty feet. And in that day, this would have been the ultimate symbol of servanthood and humility, and would have been a very clear sign to the disciples of Jesus' love for them. And so Jesus, he washes their feet in this moment. And he displays to them love. He displays to them his commitment to them. And then he says, okay, just as I have done, so you are to do for each other. And when he says this, he institutes kind of this law of love. This law that you would love each other as the means by which kind of the Old Testament law gets put to work in the New Testament. And so he established this practice that would help them to remember his love. So after he does the washing of their feet, he sits down and he has a Passover meal with them. But then he explained what the elements of that meal represent. He took the bread and he lifted it up and he broke it. And he took the cup and he said of both of these things that these are to be done or taken or eaten, enacted in remembrance of him. The body and the blood, these elements, they represented what he would actually use to love his followers and to ultimately purchase his pardon for them. So you might be now expecting strategies where, okay, Jesus told us to love one another, so on this Maundy Thursday, let's talk about strategies how we can best love each other. And actually, that's not what I'm going to do today. I'm actually going to take it a different direction. I actually want to ask the question about communion. Because Jesus instituted this thing in this Passover meal. And so I want to ask the question, what are we doing when we take communion? So there are a few things that I want to highlight. First of all, we remember Jesus' sacrifice in the context of Jesus' command. So Jesus, when he institutes this, he does it in the upper room with the disciples while he's giving these commands, and actually this whole very long lecture about what it looks like to love each other. And so we remember Jesus' sacrifice not as an individual thing, but we remember it actually as he's talking about it in the context of his command that we would love one another. And so yes, when we think of communion, we typically think of it's an opportunity to remember that Jesus died for me. And yes, it is an opportunity to remember that Jesus died for me, but actually communion, what it does is it takes our vision a step beyond that to this: Jesus died for us. So communion is important because of its corporate nature. So Jesus loved us through his broken body and his shed blood, and invites us into a community that shares that love with each other. This is what communion reminds us of. It's not just that Jesus died to save me, it's that Jesus died to save us and make us his people. And so when Jesus has the Lord's Supper with his disciples and he says, hey, do this in remembrance of me, this is what he's saying. He's saying, eat and drink this meal together. Remember and celebrate my loving sacrifice, and let your remembrance draw you into love of each other. Okay, so can we get really practical then? Because there's a question that many people have of like, how do we celebrate communion if we aren't physically together? So here's how. First of all, we see love that we have towards one another in us not being physically together. So let me explain what I mean by that. While it would be our preference to be physically together at this point, what we're actually doing is we're setting aside our preference to be physically together in order to love each other, in order to actually protect each other, which means that our lack of physical presence because of the COVID-19 crisis, our lack of physical presence with each other is not indicative of a lack of love, but it exemplifies our love for each other. So the fact that we're not physically present actually reveals that we have love for each other. Second, if the first is true, then when we choose to do something all at the same time, even though we are not physically together with each other, we are still actively exercising our togetherness, even though we're not physically together. So third, so this is the third piece of this, which means that, number one, if our love for each other is still being exercised in our physical separation, and number two, we are still striving to exercise our togetherness in Jesus by doing something all together at the same time, then number three, we actually have a moment in space and time where we can take communion together and let the remembrance of Jesus' sacrifice for us draw us into love and unity with each other. Okay. So now let's go one step further in terms of practicality. Tomorrow evening, we are going to participate in a Good Friday service with our Alliance National family. And in that service, they will be including communion, which means that we have a chance to actually take communion together, not just with our local church, but with a national church family. We have an opportunity to remember Jesus' sacrifice all together to be drawn into love and unity with our multicultural, multi-ethnic, multilingual Alliance family. And honestly, church, I am really looking forward to this opportunity. So you might have a question, though. Hey, I don't have the typical elements for communion at my house. I don't have bread right now. I don't have grape juice right now. What do I do if I have this problem? And so what? Here's the amazing thing. It's not actually about the items themselves. It's about what the items represent. There's actually nothing magical or special about the items. So you know what? Like the bread and the wine, like these are the items that Jesus used. And we should use them when we can. But if we can't get it, and all you have in your house is like Coke and popcorn, then use Coke and popcorn in that moment to represent Jesus' body and blood. And let those things remind you of Jesus' broken body, his shed blood, and then take communion together with other Christians. Be reminded with those other Christians who are worshiping the same Jesus at the same time, and let your remembrance of what Jesus did draw you into a deep love for all of the saints that have been united together through Jesus' blood. So that's actually like what we can do in communion. So tomorrow we're going to have that opportunity. So if you have bread and juice, great. Use bread and grape juice. If you don't have bread and grape juice, use Coke and popcorn. Now, last question. You might start asking the question, okay, so are we going to start having Coke and popcorn for communion when shelter in place is lifted? And I'm just going to say no. Just no. So thank you, Alliance Bible Church, and I will look forward to talking to you all tomorrow.